Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for joining me. Now, I think Labor has called this thing on China, attacking Morrison and then also calling for greater military cooperation with China, completely wrong. But do you think it's got a point?
Well, I think the attack on Morrison for making the speech in Chicago is just barking mad from Albanese. And I like Albo, he's a good bloke and generally not bad on common sense, but this is just barking mad in every way. You can't make a speech about the Indo-Pacific region in which you don't mention China. That would be ludicrous. And guess
I also didn't like the way he reacted, as in China might be cross, therefore don't say it. I mean, for heaven's sake, is that how we work now?
Yeah, of course, that's ridiculous. I explore this in a piece tomorrow, and his own people say things which makes China cross all the time. I mean, Labor under Bill Shorten rejected the proposed extradition treaty. You know, Penny Wong has numerous times said she accepts the American criticisms of China on trade practices. So what is Albo really saying? That we ought to have one view of China which we whisper to them privately and another view of China which we say publicly? I think Morrison was perhaps a fraction more Delphic than he needed to be. I think all of this confusion arises out of people not following foreign policy, but it's also that his speeches, he said just so much and no more, and he's invited people to make.
And it's perfectly perfectly true that China is now a big country, pretty rich, comparatively speaking, certainly to other Asian countries, and perhaps can pull its weight a bit and not get, ride too much and get a free ride. I want to, though, quote you something that alarmed me most. This is actually Labor's deputy leader, Richard Marles, speaking yesterday to an audience at China's Foreign Studies University in Beijing. And he said this: our starting point has to be that we respect China. We must seek to build it, and not just in economic terms, but also through exploring political cooperation and even defence cooperation. Now, given that China now has the world's second biggest, most powerful military and is a hostile dictatorship, what on earth are we doing cooperating militarily with that?
Well, again, Andrew, I'm inclined here to give Miles the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we already do quite a lot of stuff with the Chinese military. What we must never do is exercises with them in which they gain any military information about us. We must never.
The whole point of an exercise is to gain military information.
Not altogether. For example, you might do disaster relief. Most of the stuff we do with them is about disaster relief. So if there's a tsunami in Indonesia, let's cooperate in delivering, medicine and food. The Americans do this too. I mean, the Americans have occasionally invited the Chinese to, send a boat to go into the disaster relief bits of the pack rim exercises or something like this. The one year it was very weird because the Chinese agreed to send a ship to do that, and then they also sent another intelligence gathering ship to spy on the exercise, which resulted in the Americans telling them to buzz off. But having a military-to-military relationship with people who might be your adversaries is not bad in itself. The relationship our military had with the Indonesians was very critical in keeping things calm in East Timor, but you must never do an exercise with them which allows them to gain any military, operational information about you. I think that's what Miles would have had in mind, because Miles has a great record of being a hawk on defence and the US alliance and so forth.
I don't think that came through at all in what in the excuses made today by Labor. Well, I mean, the point is that we do face a rising power. I showed footage before of what we were told are Uyghur prisoners in China. We don't actually know when it was shot or where it was shot, but the British Foreign Affairs Office says it's disturbing. I mean, doesn't that suggest something about China that I think Labor and the Prime Minister too perhaps need to be a little bit more frank about? This is a rising totalitarian threat.
Yes, I think that's, I think you're absolutely right, Andrew, and God bless you for being denounced by them the other day. I want you to know that I too have been an enemy of the Chinese people in the People's Daily. We ought to have a special time made. I don't
know if I dare go back, and I mean that quite seriously.
Yeah, no. Well, I think that's a sober and serious reflection. But both our political parties do actually say things which indicate their extreme unhappiness with the direction that China has taken politically under Xi Jinping. But they say it pretty softly. Now, you can say they're cowards, or you could say they're just being a bit careful. But in the recent speeches of the Labor Party, they've mostly acknowledged that China is an authoritarian system and we don't share its values. Morrison, I think, has been, you know, reasonably direct in America. We don't talk with the frankness of the Americans. Partly that's Trump, but partly it's because we're not the world's biggest, most powerful superpower, you know. I mean, America is an 800-pound gorilla, China is a 500-pound gorilla, and we're a pretty strapping chimpanzee, you know, so...
And even then, I think you're flattering us. Can you tell us what's going on in Indonesia, Greg, with these new laws that are going through its parliament, right? Now, our Foreign Affairs Department has updated its travel warning for Indonesia, saying these laws may prohibit adultery or sex outside of marriage, and that includes all same-sex sexual relationship, well, you know, gay sex, with charges only proceeding, though, following a complaint by a spouse, a child or a parent. What on earth is going on up there, and what does it mean for Bali?
Well, Andrew, you know, those are great questions. Now, this new penal code, which has gone through the Indonesian parliament, which does prohibit extramarital sex, it also makes it a crime to insult the president, is a very dangerous and authoritarian code. Now, at the last minute, President Joko Widodo has asked for it to be put aside. So they've got to the brink of this and then put it aside. There is, I think, a creeping authoritarianism coming into Indonesia, not through the presidency, but through the parliament, which is increasingly Islamic and somewhat intolerant. There's a lot of fight back against this in Indonesia. There are demonstrations against this penal code. Of course, the penal code probably reflects a lot of provisions that were in Australian law, you know, in the 1930s or 1950s or something like this. So we shouldn't go, I mean, I think they're wrong, they're bad, but we shouldn't go insane about it. And of course, typically in Indonesia, stuff like this is never enforced, except maybe in Aceh. But, you know, it's a bad development. It'll be interesting to see if President Widodo gets it removed, simply gets it delayed, or a typical Indonesian compromise would be that it's passed but never enacted, or it's watered down, or there's some massive confusion and no action is ever taken by their law enforcement authorities.
I thought it was interesting the Australian government has put this travel warning up there. I think that was firing a shot across the bows, because even if it's enacted, it'll take 2 years to come into force. So my tip is, if you want to see Bali, see it within the next 2 years, because after that...
Or travel with your wife.
Or travel only with your wife. Exactly correct.